everybody. I'm Marilyn, CEO and founder of Cosmic Centaurs and the host of our amazing weekly series, Center Stage, where we explore bold ideas about the future of work and learning with some amazing guests who come on LinkedIn every Thursday at 2:30 p.m. UAE time to share insights, opinions, and perspectives about how we work and learn. As always, before we begin, just a reminder, give this video a like or share it with anyone who might be interested in the topic we're covering today. But also, don't be shy to contribute or ask questions in the comment box. I'm always on the lookout for those, and hopefully we can get a few tricky questions to ask Helen today and put her on the spot. Today we'll be hosting a Discuss segment with Helen Al Uzaizi, who's joining me. Helen is an established businesswoman and an active community member. She has more than 17 years of experience in marketing, nonprofit management, entrepreneurship, and she's worked with major brands, nonprofit organizations, and startups across the region as a mentor, board member, and advisor. She's a member of the Board of Trustees of Pacey's charity working with Palestinian refugee children through sports, and an advisor and brand ambassador for the Social Enterprise Project, working on empowering Palestinian and Syrian refugee women. She's also the CEO of BizWorld, UAE, Egypt, and Jordan, a social enterprise that teaches kids entrepreneurial skills and mindsets. She's the founder of Future Entrepreneurs, a platform that aims to empower youth entrepreneurs in the MENA. And most recently, she took the role of Director of Entrepreneurship and Youth Startup Innovation and Social Impact with GEMS Education. Helen, I have no idea how you do it all. On top of that, you were recently named one of the UAE's 100 smartest people, but I already knew that. And one of the 50 most influential women in the Arab world. You're a TEDx speaker on the topic of entrepreneurship and education, and a mother of two beautiful daughters, but also a runner, a triathlete, and an adventurer. You believe in making dreams come to life and that anything is possible. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes, it's a real pleasure. Ever since I met you, which is, perhaps about a little more than a year ago, I always found your work teaching youth about the skills that power entrepreneurship to be really foundational. I was looking at some data preparing for our conversation today, and I realized that small businesses, we always say like SMEs are such an important part of the economy, but here's a few numbers. In the US in 2019, half of the private sector workforce was employed by small businesses. And for the last 20 years, SMEs have been responsible for 2 out of every 3 new jobs. The UAE's data is quite similar. We have around 400,000 SMEs, and they contribute 60% of the non-oil economy and 86% of the private workforce. So in that sense, entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial skills are an essential driver of innovation and economic growth. And it is important that we teach young people and children some of those skills needed to run or contribute to a business, whether it's financial literacy or public speaking or conflict resolution or any of the skill sets needed to have an entrepreneurial mindset. And so I'm very eager to learn from you about how we can start teaching these concepts to youth and how you do that, how you integrate it into school programs, but also how you've adapted to the pandemic and what you think it means for the future of work and learning. So thank you so much for joining us. I guess maybe you could start us off by telling us about the kind of programs that you run and what is the outcome that you try to accomplish.
Absolutely. So when I first started, this was back in 2016, the concept of youth entrepreneurship was just very, very foreign. People thought that I was kind of embarking on a really ridiculous journey, thinking, how do you teach young kids as young as 7 years old entrepreneurship? And it took me quite a while to kind of shift the mindset from, we're not trying to develop entrepreneurs, but we're trying to develop a mindset. And if you look at the statistics and the data, most values are established when children are as young as 7 and 8 years old. So if we're talking about developing a mindset, then that's when you need to start doing these different activities and projects to start building this kind of these personality traits, whether it's resilience or grit or negotiation or creativity and things like that. And that's actually the foundation of what we do. I work with kids starting from as young as 6 and 7 years old. And what we do is through a project-based learning approach, we take them through the entrepreneurial cycle. And is this something that's foreign to them? Absolutely not. They're doing it anyway. When you look at kids playing, they're playing and they're doing little markets, they're negotiating, they'll come to their parents and try to sell them fruits. So all of these things are actually really already part of the way that they do things. The only thing that we really do is give it a structure and give it a purpose, give it an outcome. And so children, when they start playing, they're playing with some sort of an idea that they're going to go through a process, that they're going to have different people on the teams, that they're going to have different jobs and roles, and they have to think about the finances. And the reason why this is so important is if you look at any grade 1 class today, grade 1 kids are around 7 years old. 65% of them are going to be in jobs that don't exist today. And we are preparing them for a world, if you go through the traditional trajectory of education, we're preparing them for a world that doesn't actually exist and that we don't really understand. So yes, of course, science is important and all of that, but that's all information that's becoming more and more available on Google. And what they really need are the skill sets. And so the skills that we look to kind of embed in the curriculum through integrating into math, English, social studies, training the teachers are things like resilience, negotiation, grit, creativity, trying to embed the concept and the mindset of innovation. How do you take something and what do you do with it? And the foundation of entrepreneurship, in my kind of definition, not personally, but with the one that I use, is that entrepreneurship is taking an idea and turning it into an action. And so we give them the tools necessary to do that.
I have so many reactions to that. It's interesting because I had to go and do an executive MBA in order to acquire basic financial literacy skills, right? Like I was already a manager, I had a team of 60 people, but I couldn't pick up like a balance sheet or a P&L or even didn't know what EBITDA meant. I always joke that the reason I went to do my executive MBA is because of that. And this week I don't know why, I was kind of thinking back to the stuff we studied at school, and it's like this organic chemistry stuff. I mean, honestly, I could have lived without it, and all of these words that you're bringing up, beyond just the literacy around some aspects of what it means to bring an idea to life, but this resilience and collaboration and conflict resolution and so on. These are topics that our clients today are coming to us because of the pandemic and saying, how can I teach my organization about these things? And I think it's fascinating to be able to, as you say, in the formation years of these kids, to make these attributes and these ways of reacting to the changing world around them part of who they are. I wonder how, you kind of mentioned that it did take you a while to convince, the educational system to let you in. Can you tell us a little bit about that journey, and how did educators perceive this? How do they perceive it today? But also, what were the reactions of some of the parents, along the route in the last few years?
There were a few very different reactions. So at the beginning, everyone thought, why don't you do it for an older age group? Because 7 and 8-year-olds are too young. So there was all that kind of educational process. And what I had to do was I started writing articles about it. I worked with Entrepreneur Middle East magazine. I wrote a blog. I had regular columns just showing why this is important, trying to really educate people. So that was the first step. Then the school started saying, oh, this is awesome. But you know what? We already do it because our grade 6 teacher brings in a chocolate bar and they melt it and the kids make cupcakes and then they sell them in a bake sale. And I'm like, excellent. But that's just one part of it. That's not the full spectrum. And so kind of then saying, okay, the fact that you're already doing something means that you guys believe in it. So how can I help you make it even better? And then there was the parents. Parents were all for it. Parents loved it. So I think they were kind of the ones that became my ambassadors to school. So parents would say and until even last week, I had a parent who wanted to introduce me to their kids' school. So the parents are all for it because parents want and they're hungry for something new and different. And then there's the other spectrum, which is other end of the spectrum, which is like the refugee camps and the youth organizations. And there, everyone thought I was completely out of my mind. They were like, these kids don't even go to normal school. How are you going to expect them to actually do something extracurricular? Because obviously schools in refugee camps will not pay for something like this or bring in something like this. So I had to do it as an extracurricular kind of weekend project, etc. But they were the ones that were the most engaged, the ones that saw the biggest change. I saw the biggest change in. I had a mother come on the last day crying, saying how excited she was that her son was talking to his father about the plumbing business being the father was a plumber, and things like that. So the transformation from 2016, where when I told people about it, they went, "Huh? Really?" To now, people saying, "Oh my God, that's exactly what the world needs," has been really, really, I mean, like completely 180 degrees, completely different world. But the schools are still very resistant, I'm going to have to say. And it's not because the schools don't want the change, but it's because the teachers are already overwhelmed. The teachers don't necessarily want to have to get trained on something else. And the system itself is quite overwhelming. There are too many exams, too many tests. And even if a school is a super progressive, awesome school, they still have MAP testing and CAT testing. And there's just so many requirements from so many authorities that it makes it very difficult to be creative. And the only way that I was able to navigate that is by actually training the teachers and positioning it as a kind of training module for teachers, professional development. And this is how you can enhance your existing curriculum rather than adding onto the subjects that they're already overwhelmed with and inundated with work with and grading, etc. And that has worked. So
I think that's a very, very interesting model. And it's very interesting, as you try to kind of develop new ways of working. I mean, we're interestingly faced with similar questions in our work as, do we train the end user, or do we train the trainer? Because then we can also scale the impact of what we do through these other professionals doing the same thing. I have so many follow-up questions on what you said. I'm going to start with the first one, which relates to something you said earlier on, which is you were met with a lot of resistance about the age group that you were trying to target. And I was wondering if, from your own experience, you feel like kids have any advantages over adults in embracing that entrepreneurial mindset or not. And I wondered if you had any stories you'd like to share.
Actually, I have a lot of stories, but then something happened today. And it happened with my daughter. So I do a lot of work with GEMS, and GEMS World Academy Dubai is the center of excellence for entrepreneurship within the GEMS education group. And my daughter is in grade 4, and they're now learning about the entrepreneurial cycle. And so she comes to me with one of her friends with this little notebook, and she says, "Mom, we've decided we're going to start a business." I'm like, "Okay, how's that?" And she says, "We're going to do these stress balls." And then they had written down all the ingredients, and they thought about the costs and how much it's going to cost to make them, and all the different types and whatever. And the kids are sponges. And this is what I tell everyone. Kids are the most incredible sponges of information, and they are phenomenal at actually taking information and translating it quickly. They don't have the barriers to entry that we do. They don't have all the complications that we have self-inflicted on ourselves, because they are just open. And I remember there was this one child, he was around 11 years old, and he came up with this idea that we then actually funded, and we got him a mentor to help him from the business community. And the idea was a game exchange. He was like, "One of the things that frustrates me the most is that when I finish a game, I want to buy another one. My parents don't want me to buy another one. And there's nothing I can do with this game. And so why don't we set up a platform where I can exchange games with my friends?" And it was an incredible idea. We got it funded, not a lot of money, but he started something, and he was 11 years old. And now, I've got a kid that's come up with this mask that was way before COVID to help workers that are in the, laborers in the heat. And they come up with real world solutions because they see the world through really kind of sparkling eyes that are full of just hope, and it applies to the technical information and the way that they absorb it, but also to the negotiations, to their, fighting for what they believe in, because they really don't give up, because they're stubborn, and they believe in their hearts that they can change the world. And I think that is what makes me really excited about working with kids. Their kind of positive energy, belief that everything is possible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I hope I don't get this data point wrong, but I think Alexander the Great was 17 or something, right? And so I also used to remember when I was a kid and I would be in love with somebody and my mom would be like, you don't understand love. And so I waited to grow up to maybe understand love. And now I look back and I'm like, well, I actually really did. Growing up, everything becomes like, mushy and like it's not clear and everything is gray. But when you're a kid, you feel things with such intensity and certainty that you can indeed change the world. We've seen a lot of amazing inventions come out of kid, like the ocean cleaners and things like that. And actually, in an upcoming episode, we're interviewing Adam, who's an 8-year-old, and he's like single-handedly trying to shape the future of education. And I think that, to your point, children really can change the world, and you're giving them the tools to do that. I have another question around, you said earlier on that, 65% of kids today are going to end up working in jobs that we can't even name. We also know how much the pandemic has made evident the need for that entrepreneurial mindset in thinking that no matter what the future holds for you, you're able to observe it, to make some, to create some theories about it, and to try and iterate around how you can create solutions. We were reading an HBR article preparing for this. I'm just going to read a little quote, and I'd love to get some reactions from you. The current pandemic illustrates the importance of preparing entrepreneurs to face an increasing complex, uncertain world. We must educate these future leaders to view the uncertainty of our unknowable future not as a problem to be solved, but a reality to be embraced. After all, in the unknowable future, all leaders will need to be entrepreneurs, visionaries that can imagine, adapt, and act nimbly to address whatever challenges come their way. And that really sounds like what you were describing. Schools should not delay in adopting new teaching philosophies that empower the next generation of entrepreneurs as well as business leaders to meet these challenges. How do you think that enabling this youth with the entrepreneurial skills that you give them through your programs will better prepare them for the future of work?
So one of the biggest shocks to the system was on March 15th in the UAE when schools shut down. And all of a sudden, no one was prepared. Everyone knows this. It's not shocking news. How are we going to adapt? What systems are we going to use? What are we going to do? And the education system is one of the most rigid systems you can possibly imagine. And if the education system was able to adapt so fast, there's nothing in the world that shouldn't be able to also adapt as fast. And I think one of the things that I kind of saw was that this is the key to being an entrepreneur. Because if you're not able to adapt and adjust and iterate and change over time, then you're going to lag behind. And there are so many examples of really epic companies that fell behind, even as recent as last year, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. We don't even have to talk about people like Pan Am and those historical stories. Talk about things that are happening today and companies that are vanishing because they're not keeping up with the times. And what we do with the kids is we put them in very difficult situations. And I'll give you an example that's very simple. They come up with an idea, they work as a team, and all of a sudden they run out of money because we use fake money, and then they have to, so we have this whole profit and loss ledger, so they have to maintain their finances, they have to buy their material, they have to do all of that. And then eventually the project and the program is developed in such a way that they will run out of money because they have to pay salaries and rent and all of that stuff. And then eventually, when they do run out of money, they have to go to either an investor or a bank, and we teach them about the different financial tools and means that they can use. They go to an investor. What I do is I will tell the investor, ask for 50% of their company, and I'll tell the kids, don't give more than 30%, whatever you do, And you put them in that room, and they learn, how to negotiate. They decide how are they going to discuss this if they do want to give away more of their company. Who's the speaker? Who's the main? Who's going to kind of fight for what? Because they're a team of 6, 7 kids. Does the CEO come up with a unilateral decision? He says, you know what, fine, I'm going to give you 50% because he wants the money. What does that mean? And they are put in a position that normally a 7-year-old would never be put in. And they come out of that stronger. They fight, they argue. A lot of times I've had boys come and say, why is the girl a CEO? I need to be the boss because I'm a boy. And then at the end, they're like, no, we actually understand that she's better at the leadership side. And these are 8-year-old, 7-year-old, 9-year-old kids. And obviously this develops as they go along, 15 and 16, etc. But I'm talking about the basic foundations of kind of the skills that they're learning are things like, what makes a good leader? What is it when it comes to finance? What do they need to be aware of? What are they going to spend on? They start to save money and they're like, you know what, maybe we don't need to buy that much of that. And because they want to get profits, they understand the difference between revenues and expenses, all these things, which just gives them strength of character. And they're learning these things through play and through projects. And I think that's the best way to learn for them.
That's pretty incredible. I mean, everything you just described sound like decisions I have to make every week. Do we, get one more license, or do we use the free version? Is it worth it or not? Talking about investors, I'm thinking like, okay, maybe at the end of the year, but how much of my company and how much control am I willing to relinquish? And it's incredible. I mean, I'm, a full 25 years older than these kids or more. And it's incredible to think that I could have learned some of these things when I was younger. I really think that you're empowering them and it'll have more impact than we can even, measure at the moment, because this stuff compounds too, right? Like if you learn how to understand finances at that age, and then you can only become like super amazingly good at it as you get older and are exposed to more situations. And that's really incredible. In that sense, Helen, I wonder, we've been talking for a few years about how like the current educational system is flawed, how it was designed in the industrial era and meant to fulfill a different kind of objective to what we think education should be doing today. I'd love to hear your thoughts. There's a lot of talk around whether it's individualized learning as opposed to group classroom level learning, whether it's integrating social impact or environmental sciences. I know some schools just, are out there in nature, and people learn about, basic things that most of us wouldn't be able to survive in a forest for more than a day. They learn how to look at the elements and kind of analyze them. What are your thoughts around these different versions of what the educational system could look like, and where do you think that the system is going?
I think there are extremes. So some people have gone a bit too far. I'm going to be very honest, and they're like, oh, it has to all be free flowing and stuff. You know what? Kids actually need some sort of structure. Again, whether we like to admit it or not, kids thrive in structure. And that's why there's bedtime. And this is talking about babies that are 6 weeks old. So I think structure is important. I think to say that you want it all to be just outdoor and whatever, and also is a bit too much. There are systems that are adapting. And I mean, one of my favorite educational systems is the IB system. And the reason why I feel like that's a good system is because, and I'm not affiliated with the IB in any way, but the reason why I think it's a great system is because it's all about analyzing, taking concepts, taking, material and digging deeper and researching and learning for yourself. And so it prepares you really for the world. They do a lot of the sciences and the maths and things like that, which math is not necessarily about kind of understanding calculus, but it's understanding the thought process that takes you through, that you have to go through. And so do I think that it all needs to be scrapped? No, I think it needs to just be adapted. And a lot of schools and the more kind of progressive educational systems are doing that. The British system has adapted. It's still, not my favorite, but it has adapted and it is actually okay. The IB system, I think, is phenomenal. And I think that there's a balance between this extreme, like there's a wonderful school in Bali called the Green School, which is incredible, but they also use the IB system as an educational foundation. So let's not forget that there is a process that kids have to go through. And the only time you can really change the education system is when the entire ecosystem changes. When universities change, when employment changes. You can't live in the UAE without a university degree to get a visa, right? So until that changes, and then the university process changes, you can't change the school system. And there are kids that are getting homeschooled and all of that, but it's still within a structure and within a system. It has to be accredited because they can't go to university, they can't get jobs, and they can't work. They need to earn a living. So it's much bigger than just talking about the school itself. It's about the entire ecosystem that eventually might change. But for now, I think all we can do is really adapt and think about, what are the skills that are needed and kind of integrate them into what exists today.
Yeah, I remember also with this conversation about the ecosystem. I remember us having a conversation with somebody in the US who was kind of creating a new school system. And of course, we tend to be very focused on the kids because, they're kind of the user of this educational system. But I remember, I was talking to her and all those ideas were incredible. But I said, but there's just something you need to remember. Beyond the education, school is a place where parents can drop their kids off for the day, right? And disrupting school, and as we've observed, and women have been those who have had to bear the grunt of it. Not having a safe place where your kids are, doing good things from 9 to 5 every day also means one of the parents can't work. One of them has to be there to turn on the Zoom link and, do the troubleshooting and so on. And I think from an ecosystem point of view, like 1/5 of women have exited the workplace this year because of the pandemic, because they had to care for kids or family members. But school is also just a great place to get your kids to, get great babysitting. And from that point of view, the pandemic has disrupted that ecosystem. But on the positive side, what do you think are some of the things that the educational system had to learn this year that, make you optimistic and you say, well, thank goodness they learned them because it was a long time coming and I'm glad that it's going to be changing moving forward?
Schools had to become creative and schools aren't. Teachers had to become agile and adaptable, and they're not. Teachers have traditionally always been the kind of people that go in with a teacher's manual. They have their unit plans, they have their daily tasks, and it's always worked because they delivered great lessons. But the world is no longer that. And so every day I see it with my own eyes. The teachers are struggling between having to manage distance learners and then home and then in school learners. And then you have, okay, how are we going to adapt the curriculum to adjust with, these kids are going to have to do experiments at home. So they have to explain it more. It's really daunting for teachers. It's very overwhelming for teachers. It's very difficult. But I think it's forced them to think outside of the box, think creatively, and also delegate more and become facilitators more, not necessarily teachers. And these are all skills that teachers will take with them wherever they go, but also it gives students a bit more independence when it comes to how they think and how they work. So I think it's been a really steep learning curve, but I think it has been quite positive. And touching on what you were saying about, women in the workforce, I have 2 kids, and when they weren't sure whether they're going to go back to school or not, I'm very fortunate to have had a nanny for 13 years who decided she wanted to go back home. And so I was thinking, you know what, I'm not going to get anyone full-time. I want to get someone part-time, and that's it. But then, because the schools weren't sure, and I can't leave my kids at home alone, it's illegal actually to leave children alone at home. Forget the Zoom links, right? It's actually illegal to leave a child at home. I had to bring in someone because otherwise I would have had to quit my job and quit working, which I can't do. So I think definitely it's been a shock to the system. It's made us rethink a lot of things, but it's also made us a lot more resilient and agile, I think, for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. There's a question actually here related to Agile. So it says, a lot of entrepreneurs face the reality of failure. And while we're not teaching kids to be entrepreneurs, iteration is one of the mindsets that can soften the landing of failing. Do you host retrospectives with kids to reflect and share structured feedback with each other when things don't go as planned? And if so, how do you teach them to iterate their ideas based on that feedback?
One of the things that actually is embedded is that they're kind of forced to fail at some point. And they're forced to fail in one of the, it doesn't always have to be a failure in their product or in their project or their business idea, but they will struggle with the team dynamics because we make sure that they are in very difficult team structures. We also make sure that they fail when it comes to money and they run out of money. So that's actually embedded in the way that it's kind of put together. And then after every session, we always do what worked, what didn't work, what could we have done better. And you'll find that over the span of so a lot of times we do it over the span of a whole entire term. And so you'll find that by the end of the term, the way that they're talking about their failures and the things that they struggled with is very different. At the beginning, they're quite defensive. Towards the end, they're open to suggestions and ideas. And this is one of the things that I struggle with when it comes to people coming up with programs and projects all the time. Every day, there's someone doing entrepreneurship or doing some sort of project or program, and there are weekends, or it's one day, or it's a 3-hour workshop. And you can't change mindsets in a 3-hour workshop unless it's embedded in the way that they are learning on a daily basis, which is why what we do is we train teachers and do it integrated into subjects. You're not going to change their mindsets. It can't happen overnight. It'll be a fun project. They'll have picked up a few bits and pieces, but that's about it.
Yeah, I mean, all the statistics I read yesterday around the entrepreneurship education, completely agree with you. It has to be over a period of time. And it's very similar to us. I mean, if we join a company, it takes us a good 6 months before we learn how to actually do our job. So there's no reason why the kids should be able to get it from a single sitting, right? And so on this note, Helen, I want to ask you our last question, which we ask all of our guests. So please complete the following sentence and explain why you choose the word that you choose. So the sentence is, the future of learning is ...
Agile. And we just use that word, and there's a reason for it. I think agility is it's foundational. And I think that's what makes people successful. Being able to adapt and change and really grow with time, I think, is the key to everything.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that. Helen, on this lovely note, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today. And I'm really I find the programs that you're setting up incredible. And I really wish that I had been one of those kids in your programs, but it's okay. I got to learn these things eventually, I hope. I have a lot to think about, but also maybe I want to see your program to see if there's any skill set I should be learning that I haven't yet acquired. Thank you to everybody who attended as well for tuning in and engaging. Of course, the video will be available on LinkedIn for longer. So if you want to share it with anybody, please go ahead and give them that link. Of course, follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. And subscribe to our newsletter on our website. Helen, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise. And please, everybody, do join us next week. We'll be speaking actually to one of these children. I don't know, maybe he might have been through one of your programs, Helen. I'm not sure, but the remarkable Adam Rafi. We're going to talk to him about his belief around the educational system, which is that one's access to education should be determined by ability and not age. So please do join us next week, Thursday at 2:30 p.m. UAE time. We wish you all a wonderful end to the week, and we look forward to seeing you.